Good evening, attendees. Continuing in our series of web seminars to brighten the day during the COVID-19 lockdown, we now have a spectacular panel of Mr. Navreet Kang and Mr. Rajan Gupta, who are chairman of RERA Punjab and Haryana. Moderating will be Mr. Amitabh Tiwari, advocate, Punjab and Haryana High Court. Very quickly, I'll just explain how the webinar will function. If you wish to ask a question, we'll connect you to the panelists after the seminar, after they're done with their panel. And if, however, you wish that we should ask the question on your behalf, then you can just write down the question, send it to us, and we will read it out and we will put it to the panelists. With that, I'll hand over to the moderator, Mr. Tiwari. Have a great session.
Good evening, everyone. Like my brother just explained, we wanted to have this seminar on RERA because it's a relatively new legislation, and it's important to have to understand how the entire act works, because it's just come in 2016 and a lot of litigation has started and a lot of jurisprudence is pouring in from various authorities and from the various high courts. So this seminar, we're just going to talk about the brief overview of the act with some special emphasis on registration and adjudication, which is the most litigated aspect of the act as of now. So like everyone is aware, the RERA was required because the developers who used to make these buildings and the houses would start marketing the project. They collected advance from the flat buyers, but they never delivered it on time. There was misrepresentation by the buyers, there was fraud played by the buyers, there were delay in projects, which led to a lot of harassment for the innocent complainants who actually spent a lot of money and a lot of their life savings in buying a home for themselves. In addition to that, the judicial decisions being passed were very slow. They were arduous. They used to take years, and at the end of the day, the entire thing from the Consumer Forum till the NCDRC till the Supreme Court took a very long time, and the buyers never really got the justice they deserved at the point of time. To regulate all this, to regulate the real estate sector, to regulate the functioning of the promoters and the real estate agents, the government came up with the Real Estate Regulatory Act. The main features of this act is to regulate the sector, to provide speedy redressal, to protect the innocent buyers, and to ensure transparency and accountability through the various provisions of the act. Now, I would just go through a bit of salient features before I hand it over to the panel. Now, the act came into force on 1st May 2016 with the handful of sections being notified at that time, but the entire act was notified on May 2017. This act is applicable to both residential and commercial projects, which is a little different from the Consumer Protection Act, which was only applicable to the residential projects. And any complainant who was approaching the Consumer Forum had to prove himself to be a consumer at the threshold. All projects under the Act have to be registered under Section 3. The registration itself brings about a lot of transparency and accountability. The mandatory disclosures have to be made by the promoters regarding the project. They have to enter into agreement of sale on deposit of a certain amount of money. They can't issue advertisements without registration. They have to abide by the brochures. They can't even change the layouts without a certain amount of authorities giving their consent. They are also bound by the promises, and the 70% of the amount received by the promoters has to be put in a separate bank account, which can only be taken out by the promoters on a certification given by an architect or the authority. So these are the variations. These are this broad overview of the act. Now I'll hand it over to Mr. Kang, who will talk to us about registration and the need for registration and how it actually works on the practical side, especially on the Punjab side. Mr. Kang, over to you, sir, for the next part.
Thank you, Amitabh. And let me begin by extending my warm greetings to my esteemed colleague and fellow panelist, Shri Rajan Gupta, and to all participants of this webinar. As Amitabh has said, that I think that we can look at the Act from two broad aspects. He called it the registration part and the adjudication part. I think we could also use that it has some normative aspects and it has curative aspects. And I think both of these aspects are related, that it's only if the system can ensure that the normative provisions of the Act are complied with, And if that is done, then I think there of course there will be correspondingly lesser need to resort to the curative aspects or the adjudication process, as Amitabh called it. And I think out of all the normative provisions or the, let's say, the preemptive aspects of the Act, registration is the most important. Amitabh has sort of smoothened my task a bit by pointing out all the features. I'll not go through them all of them in detail, but try to highlight the practical aspects of the issue that we have faced so far while Real Estate Regulatory Authority. I think first of all, I probably would like to clarify that there's a clear distinction between registration under the Act and the obtaining of a license under, in Punjab, it is the Punjab Apartment and Property Regulation Act. Haryana has similar legislations. So obtaining a license under the extent provision, PAPRA Act in Punjab was of 1995. So I think it's around those times that various states enacted legislations to regulate the grant of license for development of colonies, etc. So, but as I said, that getting a license under the PAPRA Act and obtaining registration under the Real Estate Development and Regulation Act are two very distinct categories. When we started, I think to some extent justifiably, there was some confusion among the promoters. I think people felt that if they were going to get registration under the Act, what is the point of getting a license? Or vice versa, that if they have already got a license, why should come in for registration? I think part of the reason for the confusion, at least in Punjab, was that the municipal bodies, the municipal corporations and the municipal committees were not following the practice of granting license for development of a colony. As I said, this is to be granted under the provisions of the PAPRA Act. By a notification of 2010, the competent authority to issue licenses have been designated, and in the municipal areas, it is either the municipal corporation, the corporate accounts, or it is the regional deputy director, within whose jurisdiction a particular municipal committee. But surprisingly, and I think disappointingly, we did get a formal report from the Department of Local Government last year that that department was not following the practice of issuing licenses. So actually, developers who were building or coming up with projects in municipal areas, especially towns like Zirakpur, Dera Basi, Kharad, especially in Chandigarh, felt that they had been cast with very onerous responsibilities because they had never obtained licenses before. And now we were saying that, okay, you want to come to us, please go and first obtain a license. So that is the difference between licensing and registration, which, as I said, in Punjab was a bit confusing, but perhaps it was not the same in Haryana, but there was a problem. So now, basically, you have to get all your approvals for various laws before you come to us. You have to have various approvals, your change of land use, your environment clearances, etc. So it's only when all this is ready and you are about to start with the actual construction of the project, or even maybe in some cases you can come to us once even the construction has started, that you need registration under the Act. The bar under the Act, I mean the importance of registration under the Act again is twofold. One, of course, it is a law, so you have to register that a little later. But also the section 3 of the Act says that no promoter can book, sell, advertise, or do anything of that sort without getting a project registered. Again, to give a practical turn to the legal provisions, initial stages of our working, it was argued. I mean, I think people had tried to turn this provision on its head. And it is argued that, okay, I'm constructing a building, but I'm not going to sell it or advertise about it or book any apartments therein. Therefore, I don't need registration. We found that this argument is not sort of worthy of acceptance because the requirement of registration stands on its own feet. The law says that if you are an ongoing project on the date that the relevant section came into force, that is on the 1st May of 2017, you were required to register with the relevant RERA within a period of 3 months. Similarly, if your project was not ongoing on that date, but you have obtained your approvals and you got your licenses after the coming into force of the Act, our requirement in Punjab is that you also must apply for registration within 3 months of getting the license. So that is a mandatory requirement, and it doesn't get waived if you say, no, I'm building this building only for my own pleasure. I will not be advertising or selling it. The requirement is that if you are building constructing something which is on more than 500 square yards or constructing more than you have to register. This is the important part of the registration process that I wanted to highlight. And as Amitabh said earlier, there is a whole series of requirements laid down that you have to comply with when you apply for registration. All the requirements laid down in Section 4 of the Act, and in Punjab, the rules have provided some additional documentation that is necessary. I think there's a whole host of documents, but I think if you look at it, the registration process tries to safeguard an interest, prospective investors' concerns. The kind of things that you or I would look at before you buy or decide to invest in an apartment, those are the kind of, that's the kind of information that the builder is required to give to the authorities. It is about whether you've obtained all your approvals, whether your title to the land on which your building is clear, whether you have the financial capability to carry out that project, what is the likely date of completion, what are the specifications that I'll be following, what are the amenities I will be providing for the allottees of the project. These are the kind of documents that are required to be submitted along with the registration process, along with the application for registration. And I think these documents now, since the requirement of law is that all the relevant information we put up on the website of the authority, all this information is available on the websites, all the eras in the country. And I think the important role, apart of course, transparency is very, very important. But in practical terms, I think the transparency ensures that the playing field is level between, to the extent possible, is level between the promoter and the allottees. I think we've all heard the cliche, knowledge is power, and the process of registration and putting up all the relevant information on the website does increase the knowledge and therefore the bargaining power of allottees in the particular project. Now it is clear to any allottee that this is the format of the agreement for sale or the allotment letter that is to be required. These are the documents that all the approvals that he has are up there on the website. So I think people are able to negotiate on more equal terms between when they are transaction of sale purchase of a residential unit or any unit or an apartment is going on. So that is, I think, the importance of registration under this Act. Practically, we have made the process completely online. What happens is that the promoter submits an application along with all these documents, whatever documents are available with us. We process them in-house, and it's only through an online process that our observations are conveyed back to the promoter, that this is a particular document which is still required, this is not relevant, we want this kind of thing. So this back and forth continues online, and I think it's an important part because everything, I mean, the online part, apart from being a mandatory requirement, lends much more transparency to the project, to the process, sorry, when the application right from the time when the application for registration is received till that time it's actually decided. We have as of today registered about 878 projects, and about 100 applications are still pending. The progress in the last couple of months is understandably been a little slow, but I think at the moment the pending applications should also be decided in the next couple of months. To my mind, I think the optimum level of registration for like Punjab would be anything about $1,400 project. We are proactively also seeking out projects which have not us. What we had done was written to all the licensing authorities, the GAMADAs, the GLADAs, the Bathinda Development Authority, the Municipal Corporation of Jalandhar, that please give us lists of projects for which you have issued licenses, but for which the completion certificate has not been issued, meaning thereby that those would be ongoing projects and therefore liable for registration under the Act. So proactively we had unearthed about 600 for which the promoters had not willingly applied for registration. We had issued notices to them. Those notices have been answered and the process is going on. So I think once all that is done, at least we should have about 1,400 odd projects within our. That would cover the existing situation. And thereafter, whenever new projects come in, they will keep on. Our working will keep on getting stabilized. The information about the Act and the compliances thereunder would get more widespread among the population, among the consumers as well as the allottees. So that process will carry on. The penalties for not registration are laid down in the Act, that we can impose penalties of up to 10% of the project cost of a project which is liable for registration is not applied for doing so. We have imposed penalties in about 50 odd cases already. That does require a somewhat scientific process by which we calculate the cost of the project by getting the collector's rate from the deputy commissioner of the cost of the land from the collector of the particular, ascertaining the cost of construction, ascertaining the cost of approvals. We have I think, as scientific a process as we could for assessing the total cost of the project and penalties of. I think the highest penalty we have imposed is about 2.5 crores on a promoter. So that is the penalty. But if you particularly cussed promoter and do not comply with the directions that have been issued already, we can file a complaint before the concerned competent court, and also there's a liability that can get imprisonment for up to 2 years. In fact, and if still the violation continues, the law says that it can be 2 years imprisonment or fine up to 10% of the cost of the project, or both. It can be both also. Lastly, I think I would just point out one issue which again is of concern to us as well as to further promoters: the validity of the registration. Once the process is complete and we register a project and issue a certificate, as per the law, the validity of the registration is till the time period which has been given by the promoter himself for completion of the project. Let's say the project promoter applies today and says, I'll complete the project by December 31st of 2022. We issue the registration which is valid up to that date. A gray area, however, of course, there is a provision for extension of registration, and I think the consensus that the registration can be extended for a maximum period of 1 year. But the gray area is that if he has asked, initially submitted that he will complete the project by December 20, gets extension for a year, but even then cannot complete it by December 23, let's say, what happens then? The law is not very clear. It says the Real Estate Regulatory Authority may take action as it deems fit in consultation with the state government. But what is the action to be done is, I think, a gray area. We probably haven't reached that stage in large number of cases. But what we are proposing is that a builder has made some progress or is making some progress, and the allottees, the majority of allottees are in favor of allotment to continue, then we may let him to continue. Otherwise, we can think in terms of taking over of the project. In Punjab, we haven't had to resort to that. I think these were the broad areas about registration that I wanted to highlight for your attention. I am keen to listen to Rajan ji, and also will be available for answering any questions or clarifications that arise later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kang. So now, Mr. Gupta, I'll hand it over to you to make us understand the entire adjudication part under Section 18, and especially the conundrums of jurisdiction which is being looked at right now separately from Punjab and separately from Haryana as to what goes to the AO and what goes to the authority. because as of now, in my personal experience also, I've also argued a couple of cases in the appellate authority. It has led to a situation where the complainant is completely lost, and the complainant would rather go to a consumer forum than to RERA, which completely destroys the entire reason for the act being coming into force. So it's request you to now take over and please explain the section 18 and the entire jurisdiction aspect and the complaint aspect.
Thank you, Amitabh. Hello, Navreet. You explained the registration part of the Act very, very well in great detail. That would clarify a lot of issues. I'm going to, first of all, take about 1 to 2 minutes in explaining the overall, again, it may amount to a little bit of repetition, but some amount of background for coming to the point that I have to touch relevant. You see, the real estate sector, we must all understand, constitute about 9% of the GDP of this country. In a state like Haryana, it is 11 to 12%. It's the second highest employer. Now, the post-liberalization of the economy in the country, post 1991, the size of the middle class in the country increased exponentially, and consequently it gave rise to that much of increase in the requirement of the housing for the people. Obviously, the governments could not have provided that kind of supply which earlier it used to. Necessarily, the role of private sector increased tremendously. They were able to acquire lands and they were able to develop colonies very, very quickly. So currently, overwhelming majority amount of real estate development is taking place by the players in the private sector. State government's role has decreased considerably. Now, to deal with the real estate sector being developed by the private persons, all the states of the country had their own sets of laws. There was no uniform central law or legislation on the subject. I can explain typically what was prevalent in Haryana, and I'm sure the similar laws were prevalent in all over the country. In Haryana, we had two laws called Haryana Development of Urban Areas Act 1975 and Haryana Scheduled Road Act, which is a precursor of the Punjab State Scheduled Roads Act. Under these laws, now this is very important to understand what these laws were achieving. One, they were declaring the urban areas, that such and such area is hereby declared as an urban areas, so which necessitated that any land use in those urban areas has to be according to the development plan declared by the state government. The people, anybody who wishes to develop anything in those areas had to sort of obtain change of land use. Then after obtaining the change of land use, the developers, promoters applied for grant of license. State government granted them license with certain conditions. Next was approving the development plans, layout plans, building plans, etc. for those areas, and that for those projects. And then monitoring the compliance of the conditions of the licenses. So this was the, broadly speaking, the legal regimen that we had for development of the real estate in the state. Now, it is very important to understand what this set of legislation achieved. It achieved a perfect harmonious relationship between the developer on the one side and the state government on the other. State government could develop a plan, approve the layout plans, grant license, and let the project develop. The consumer, the allottee of those projects, was nowhere in picture. State government was simply concerned with that their licenses should be renewed in time. The developers should comply with the conditions of the license, etc. Now, This setting created certain problems. The relationship of the promoters and the allottees were left completely unregulated. Unregulated in the sense that if a dispute arose between the two, the ordinary laws of the land were left to take its own course. The people could approach the civil court for the breach of contract between the parties under the Indian Contract Act, or they could approach the consumer courts for getting the redressal. Now, what it achieved was that the disputes between the two parties to the dispute, were only handled by these two courts. Second problem is that these courts had their own problems because of very heavy pendency and very heavy litigation pending before these courts. It would take years upon years to settle those matters. As a result, the developers gained a very heavily upper hand over the allottees. What the situation that the allottees could not get easy redressal of their grievances. Now, the developers started taking the allottees for granted. As a result, now what it resulted into, this is very interesting to note, that standard form of agreements became order of the day. The developers could prepare a thick document of 20, 30, 40, 50 pages and ask the allottee to sign on a dotted line. The agreements were executed much after taking a substantial amount of allotment money from the allottees. Once the allottee had parted away with such a huge amount of money, they had no other option left with them but to sign the standard agreements. Standard agreements had large number of ambiguous clauses which could be interpreted and reinterpreted by the developers at will. The development plans were changed at their own level. The allottees could not approach any fora or any authority for redressal of those problems. They would start asking large amount of money at the stage of handing over of the project, that we have incurred such and such extra expenditure, there is a cost escalation, there is an area escalation, and etc. again. So this resulted into, let us say, the allottees not having adequate confidence in the real estate sector as well as the promoters. The Parliament of India got seized of the matter, and it considered that this relationship needs to be regulated. Right now, RERA has been set up to regulate that part of it. At this stage, it's very important to understand the difference between the RERA on one side and the Indian Contract Act or the proceedings before the civil court, and the Consumer Act and the proceedings before the consumer courts on the other. In the later two, as I said earlier, only the dispute between two parties is settled, and one party wins or other party loses partly or fully. Whereas in RERA, it's interesting to understand the scheme of RERA. You see, starting from section 31 of the Act, when the complaints can be filed before the authority for any grievance or any violation or any contravention, then the functions of the authority given in section 34 to register and regulate real estate, to fix through regulation each areas under its jurisdiction the standard fees to be levied, to ensure compliance of the obligations cast upon the promoters, to ensure compliance of its own orders and regulations and provisions of the Act. So full powers to issue any kind of order as well as to implement the compliance of those orders is vested in the authority. Section 35 says that the authority can be brought into motion by any means. The authority can initiate a proceeding suo motu, by way of a complaint, on the basis of a news item, or by voluntarily monitoring the progress of a project. So the authority has plenary powers to take cognizance of any deviation by any of the parties. So that kind of plenary powers have been conferred. Section 36 gives the powers to issue interim order of any kind. Only restriction is that it has to be lawful and we have to follow the principles of natural justice. 37 gives authority to any kind of directions to any person. Any stay order can be granted by the authority. And then vast powers have been given for enforcement. That is, if any recovery is to be made from any person, it can be done as areas of land revenue, and the orders of the authority have the same force as the orders of a civil code, and it can be enforced in the same manner. Now, with this background as to the kind of the powers conferred upon the authority for regulating as well as for redressing the grievances of the allottees, we now must refer to chapter 3, which starts with section 11, stating that what are the functions and duties of the promoters. Now, the functions and duties of the promoters given in chapter 3 comprehensively covers their responsibilities towards the allottees. Virtually, there is nothing left out that a promoter owes to the allottee and that has not been provided in the Act. First of all, as required by Section 4 as well as by Section 11, every detail about the project, about the promoter, about the background, about the land, about their financial resources have to be brought in public domain. Nobody can lie about it. Then it is mandatory for the authority to put up all that information on its website. So 100% transparency has been achieved in the form of disclosing the true nature of the project to the general public, good or bad, so that people are able to take informed decisions about investing their money into that. Then nobody can take more than 10% of the money before getting agreement for sale executed. Earlier, they used to take 30, 40, 50%, and sometimes 75% of the money before execution of the agreement. Now, not more than 10% of the money can be taken. Then, before execution of the agreement, all approvals, building plans, and other plans have to be put in place, and they have to be disclosed to the allottees. Earlier situation was that one was to book an apartment, execute an agreement, but the plans were approved, amended, changed from time to time or much later than that, so that the allottees were left with virtually no remedy in that regard. Then nobody can mislead by issuing wrongful or misleading advertisements. Okay, so that also is a mandate. Section 14 says adherence to the sanction plan and the project specifications by the promoters. It's very, very important right given to the allottees that those development plans have to be adhered. Section 18 says that in the event a promoter fails to complete the project, the allottee will have an option to get out of it and seek refund along with interest and compensation. Similarly, if a project is likely to be completed and the allottee wishes to continue, he has been given the right to continue, but also along with the right to get compensated in an appropriate manner in this regard. Why I have said so, all these things? This is for the reason that it involves so many aspects. It's a numerous, when we hold a court on a day-to-day basis, hundreds of subsets of these broad rights come before us. Sometimes they are minor, sometimes they are very, very major. The people wouldn't dare to go to the consumer courts or the civil courts for redressal of those grievances. The proceedings before these authorities are very quick, very cheap. They are of summary nature, and we have allowed anyone to represent themselves or through a representative or simply file in their written arguments, and we take decision thereon. So it is the simplicity of proceedings before this authority which I would consider is the one of the important hallmarks of the Act. Now coming to the actual adjudication, the type of litigation that has come before us. I would say in Haryana we have two authorities, one for district Gurugram and second for rest of the state, and the chairman of our rest of the state. Before us, about 3,400 complaints have been received, out of which we have disposed of about 1,900. 1,500 odd could not be disposed of because for the last about 8-9 months, large number of litigation before the Honorable High Court as well as Tribunal is going on, and we hope that it will settle in 2-3 months' time, and thereafter those complaints will also be taken up. The kind of the complaints we have received is, number one, people are asking for compensation for inordinate delay. Okay, there has been delay ranging from 2 years to 10 years, or at times 12 years in handing over of the project, and the project has still not been handed over. So how we are handling these matters, I'll just deal with that. Second is the demands being made by the builders at the time of offer of possession. They come up with that we have increased the area, there has been a cost escalation, we are providing you the let us say car parking, covered car parking, which was not the original thing. We have provided certain additional facilities, etc., etc. Now those kind of matters then we have to settle. Then the next set is coming is that the developers are not providing certain promised facilities like clubs, like schools, like varieties of other things. Sometimes they are not executing the conveyance deeds, etc., etc. The procedure adopted by us is that within 45 days, that immediately on receipt of the complaint, automatically a notice is generated to the other party, and a date for hearing after 45 days is auto-fixed by the system. After 45 days, both parties present themselves before the authority. Sometimes the developers try to call delay by not filing replies, in which case we never ever grant an adjournment without imposing a cost. On the first date, we impose a cost of 5,000 rupees to the authority and 2,000 to be paid to the complainant, and on the next date we impose a cost of 10,000 and 5,000 on everyone. Usual experience is that in 90% of the cases, replies are provided within, let us say, the prescribed time period. Thereafter, hearing both the parties, we pass our orders, and they are simultaneously uploaded on the website of the authority. So far, the authority has not faced any serious challenge, except that in one case, the Honorable Appellate Tribunal of Haryana, following the Appellate Tribunal of Punjab, had ruled that the authority does not have jurisdiction to deal with the matters dealing with the refund of the matter, which essentially means Section 18. If somebody seeks refund for delay or for non-completion of the project, then the matter will not fall within the jurisdiction of the authority. What we studied from the order of the tribunal was that this was done on the basis of certain wordings of the rules notified by the state government. The state government of Haryana modified those rules and accordingly settled that dispute, and accordingly the authority again started hearing the matters and kept doing it till November 2019. Now in November 19, some people, which now numbers about 136 writ petitions, have been filed against both the authorities of Haryana. They are now listed for 15th of July before the Honorable High Court for hearing, in which they have challenged the various aspects of RERA. Principally, first is Section 43, subsection 5 has been challenged that while filing an appeal before the tribunal, while the promoters are asked to deposit the entire money payable to the allottees have not been given a corresponding obligation. So this is unconstitutional according to them, as being violated of Article 14 of the Constitution of India. Second, they are talking about is the retrospective application of the RERA Act. They say the authorities are applying the provisions of the RERA Act even on those agreements which were executed prior to coming into force of RERA. Fourthly, they are talking about the lack of jurisdiction of the authority, as has been said by the tribunal. Initially, the authority had decided that since we are a court, we cannot be contesting the matter. But in one case, Honorable High Court has asked for the views of the authority. We have formulated a resolution which is being legally vetted, and we are going to place it before the Honorable High Court, explaining to them the views of the authority, and we will await the outcome of the litigation, whereafter the matter will restart. So currently, out of pending 1,000 odd cases, about 400 matters pertain to the refund matters, which we are not hearing as a consequence of the decision of the Honorable Court, and remaining 600 matters are listed before us. Due to COVID-19, we had adjourned all the matters, but we are going to restart our court proceedings effective second week of June. So broadly, this is all I had to say, and I'll prefer to take questions so that one can touch the specific aspects that if anybody wishes to touch. Thanks.
So thank you, Mr. Gupta. Before we take on the questions, I would just like to inform the listeners about certain judgments which had come up in the recent time. So one of the major judgments was the Pioneer Urban Land Infrastructure with the Union of India with regards to Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, where the Supreme Court had categorically said that the remedy under RERA and the Consumer Forum and the IBC are concurrent remedies, and Section 88 and Section 89 of the Act provides that the remedy under RERA is in addition to the remedies under the other acts. But there has also been a recent judgment of the NCDRC which has been upheld by the Delhi High Court, wherein they have said that even though the remedies are simultaneous and concurrent, once you approach one of the forums, you cannot approach the other forum. In addition to that, another very important judgment passed by the Punjab Appellate Tribunal was the Silver City Construction versus State of Punjab, wherein the Appellate Tribunal stated that irrespective of registration, all the projects come under the purview of RERA. Therefore, the promoters who were arguing on the fact that the project is not registered, does not require registration, and they do not fall within the ambit of RERA, that argument was shut down by the Appellate Tribunal. Another very important judgment was passed recently by the Bombay High Court on lease agreements, whether RERA is applicable to lease agreements. In that name of the judgment is Lavasa Corporation Limited versus Jitendra Jagdish Tulsiana and others, wherein they made it very clear that even lease agreements fall within the ambit of RERA, and the RERA authority will have jurisdiction on the same. I think one of the most important judgments which Mr. Gupta has also alluded to and Mr. Kang also alluded to was the jurisdiction of AON authority in Punjab. That the name of the judgment is Sandeep Man versus RERA authority, in which after very strong arguments and after a detailed judgment was passed by the Appellate Tribunal, wherein they categorically said that wherever the term compensation is used, that has to go to the adjudicating officer, while the refund of money, while the interest for delay in possession has to go to the authority. Now, as Mr. Gupta alluded, that was followed in Haryana, but it was later overturned by the state government, and that is still pending. And we hope that the High Court quickly decides that if it's gone up in appeal, and we get some more clarity on the same. Now, I would like to open it up for certain questions if anyone has some. So we do have one question which has come up right now is
Amitabh, before you proceed further, I'll just like to say a few words on the three judgments that
Yes,
you
sir.
have.
Please,
Or
sir.
have
If I'm
no, first of all is regarding the Pioneer. That is the interplay between the IBC and the RERA. I don't think there's any contradiction between the IBC and the RERA. IBC is a measure of last resort. As a matter of fact, in
Yes.
one of the matters which are pending before the IBC, we had granted a preferential right to the allottees of a project where they wish to take it over for completion at their own level. There was a company which had multiple projects running all over the place. The whole company was taken before the IBC, and we had said that allottees, that not all the projects are equally badly done. If allottees of a particular project wishes to take over, then Section 8 will override all other consideration, and that has been accepted by
okay.
the appellate tribunal of the NCLAT. So
All
that
right.
is one. So there, I would say there is a too much of contradiction between the IBC, and in fact both put together will resolve large number of
Yes, sir.
socio-economic and project depending. So the second judgment of the Bombay High Court you mentioned, the second judgment you mentioned was of what?
So Lavasa, where they held that the lease agreements
That
come within
part,
the ambit of RERA.
that part I haven't studied. I don't know what kind of lease agreement, but those lease agreements amounted to sale or something. Probably those they must have brought, but
Maybe.
if they were short-term lease, I don't think they will really be covered. So one need to look at what kind of lease agreements were placed before the honorable court.
In that case, sir, it was a very long lease. It was almost a 100-year lease. So
Yeah,
maybe
so it must have
that's
been. So
why.
that lease has been interpreted as sale.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. So one question which has come up is, I think both the panelists can answer this, is whether assured returns. Now, there are a lot of agreements which have the concept of assured returns. Do assured returns fall within the ambit of RERA? So if both of you would like to answer that, because a lot of queries are coming regarding the assured return concept, because there are so many. Even I had done one case where it was dismissed because it was held that assured returns do not fall within the ambit of RERA. So, sir, if you would like to add something to it.
There's a concept. Mr. Kang, would you like to come in first?
Mr. Kang has to unmute himself. Yes.
Yeah, as I said, as a first reaction, I would agree with Amitabh that assured return does not come within the ambit of RERA. I think it's more of a transaction between understanding between the two parties, which at least on initial consideration does not seem to be violating any provisions of the RERA Act. But anyway, I think these have now been banned by SEBI, so I think the question should not be coming up anymore. But that's a kind of an indication. Let's see what Rajan has to say about this.
A large number of disputes have come before us in which the agreements made between the parties, that's prior to RERA era, was that till the possession is handed over, after payment of certain amount of money, a certain amount of, let us say 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000, whatever amount of will be paid as assured return. Now, if our interpretation is that if an agreement between the parties could be entered into lawfully, if there is nothing otherwise illegal about an agreement, then parties have a right to execute kind of any agreement, and those agreements can be enforced by the court of law. Now here, since the jurisdiction of any other court of law now is barred, and if somebody chooses to come before RERA, that provision of the agreement must be enforced by us. And I think nearly 100 or more, or maybe more, has cases of this nature have come in which we have forced the parties to start paying where they had stopped paying, and they are being implemented. I mean, we are not finding anything as such per se illegal about the clause relating to the assured returns. And by personal interpretation, even though the matter has not yet come, if it is lawful, then any lawful agreement can be made. There's nothing to prohibit. There's nothing under the RERA which prohibits it.
So there's one question from Mr. Mohammad Sartaj, who says that during the moratorium, whether RERA can pass judgment also under the insolvency code, once the petition is admitted, a moratorium is passed over all the proceedings against the corporate debtor, which might be the promoter in the present case. Mr. Sartaj asked if whether RERA can pass a judgment if RERA was approached before the moratorium order. I think so. This is
in the Pioneer judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court has said that IBC will take precedence over the RERA first. Two, by simply declaration of the moratorium, the proceedings before any other court actually comes to a standstill and it cannot proceed with, I think, Section 14 or something of
Section 14. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
Section 14, the proceedings before any other court cannot go on. So as such, proceedings cannot go on. However, Section 8 comes to the rescue of the allottees. In large number of cases, what we have ordered that if allottees should like to form an association and wish to take over a project, then they can come to RERA, and the RERA has been passing orders saying that you place our orders before the NCLT and seek modification of their order to the extent of that. We are not contradicting the orders of the NCLT. We are respecting the orders of the Honorable Supreme Court that the proceedings before the NCLT will take a precedence over the RERA, but that is not prohibiting us from passing an order, beneficial order, for the benefit of the allottees of a specific project. Because before the NCLT, the entire company is to be liquidated.
Yes.
Whereas the rights of the individual allottees are in respect of their project, not against the whole company. Or they become a partners of their project.
So there's another question from Mr. Diwan Munjal. Is RERA registration barred of the project which has taken regularization or compounding certificate from the local government, but is not absolute owner of the land where project is developing?
Ansab.
Amitabh, the question wasn't very clear. Is RERA, if person has compounded violations?
No, sir. The question is RERA registration barred of the project by the promoter who has taken regularization or compounding certificate from the local government, but that promoter is not the absolute owner of the land where the project is developing?
I think that question is very clearly two distinct aspects. One is that if you have got your project either compounded the violations or you have got the project regularized, whether it is barred from registration. No, it's not. I think Punjab unfortunately has this big problem of unauthorized colonies, and the government has over the last 2 decades come out with various policies for regularizations. So we are in fact asking the colonies that are regularized under that policy to come forth and register themselves. In such cases, because they don't have a license, we are treating the regularization certificate as a license voter, and then asking them that to come and apply for registration for 3 months your regularization. The second part was that
if the promoter is not the absolute owner of the land where the project is developing.
No, I think that has always been the case, that even if you don't own the entire land, you can come ahead and obtain consent of the landowners who own that remaining part of the land, and you can come and register your project or obtain a license. I mean, it is allowed under the PAPRA Act for a license that you don't have to own the entire thing, and it is there. I mean, there are huge projects which people pool in and buy, and only one of them is treated as a promoter. So I think there's no issues.
So there's another question from Mr. Narendra Kumar Bhardwaj, who asks whether dispute of maintenance under the maintenance agreement with the builder can be adjudicated by the RERA authority.
Rajan?
The interpretation of the law by Haryana RERA is that whatever agreement has been made between the parties, and if a party is not discharging its part of obligations, that can be enforced by RERA. Now, whether a project is registered with us or not registered, completed or incomplete, our interpretation is that if there are subsisting obligations between the parties, to the extent of those subsisting obligations, the RERA law kicks in and relief can be granted.
So there's another, it's a pretty long question. I'll just ask it by Mr. Ankit Bhargav. He says that the RERA Act Section 18 will be attracted upon the violation of the provision. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a problematic question. So he's given a problem. I'll just ask the problem.
You'll need to repeat because voice is not clear.
So the question is that he gives a problem, and the question is in the form of a problem. So I'll just tell you the facts of it. He says that the agreement was executed in 2014 and the possession was to be handed over in the year of 2016. However, the possession is delayed. Then under which provision of RERA interest can be awarded for delayed period? Since there is no violation of the registration certificate which is valid till January 2022, and therefore there is no violation as on date. So what I understand is that the registration was given till January 2022, which means that the promoter has stated that he will complete the project by January 2022. But as per the agreement, he has not completed the project. Then will there be any violation of the act itself, because he himself has given affidavit to the authority that by January 2022 I will finish the project. That means he has unilaterally extended the time. Does that then attract RERA itself, or is there any violation of that?
Please read section 11.4, subsection 4 of section 11 of the Act, along with section 34F. That will make the matters absolutely clear. Section 11.4 says that the parties are supposed to act in accordance with the provisions of the Act, the rules, the regulations, and the agreements between the parties. Right? Yes. Secondly, 34F says that all orders of the authorities can be enforced. Now, the authority has been saddled with the responsibility of ensuring that the parties follow the provisions of the agreement. Those agreements cannot be rewritten simply because after coming to force RERA, they got themselves registered and they have got different sets of conditions as a part of the agreement between the parties is sacrosanct, and all full provisions of the agreement will override everything else. So if they had agreed in 2014 that certain compensation will be paid for delay, and there has been delay, that delay in accordance with the provisions of the agreement. Of course, there is a difference of view prevailing between various authorities, whether with retrospective effect it will be at the rate SBI MCLR plus 2%, or it will be as per the provisions of the agreement. That matter is subjudiced before the Honorable High Court. But the provisions of the agreement are sacrosanct and they cannot be overridden or eclipsed by a provision in the registration certificate.
So the one last question is asked by Mr. Himanshu Arora. He says, in absence of a provision of arrest as in the Consumer Protection Act, does the execution become toothless under RERA, as the areas of land revenue will take a long time and the promoters might delay it and cause inordinate delay in enforcement and execution of the order?
You see, as I said, that all orders of the authority can be executed like the orders of the civil court. So, Order 21, Rule 37 of the CPC. We have been issuing notices to the people for as to why they should not be sent to the civil imprisonment in the absence of compliance, and usually people have been complying in that consequence, even though majority of all these orders also form a part of the writ petitions pending, 136 writ petitions pending before the High Court. So the matter at the moment, I would say, is subjudiced, but we have been resorting to Order 21, Rule 37.
Okay, sir. Mr. Kang, if you want to add something to that, we'll wrap it up after this.
Yeah, on the first issue about if your date of completion goes beyond the time we have agreed to in the agreement, I agree with Rajan that if you have delayed your project, you have to keep on paying interest for the period of delay. We can perhaps not force, I mean, if the relief sought was to asking for possession of a unit, we maybe cannot force the builder to deliver possession before the date of completion that he has sort of submitted to us. But he'll have to pay interest for as long as the period, as long as the delay in handing over possession is concerned. On the second issue about civil enforcement, I know some authorities have resorted to that. We in the Punjab Authority have not done so. I think technically there is no bar on it, because as Rajan said, that it says that orders of the authority are executable as like any decree of the civil code. And in fact, it says that in the first instance, the authority should itself try to execute the order. And if it fails to do so, then we can take the assistance of the principal civil judge. But before that, we have the powers to do so. I think, and some authorities have. I have personally know of cases in which some builders have been sort of subjected to civil imprisonment.
Okay, so we will wrap it up as it was already 6 o'clock. I would like to thank Mr. Kank and Mr. Gupta for sharing their insights and the practical knowledge on the RERA Act and its implications. And I would like to thank all the attendees again for attending this seminar. I hope we have been able to answer some questions and declutter the act for you. And thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kank. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. And
Thank you.
We'll
Bye.
wrap up. Sir, bye. Thank you.
Thank you.